Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about grading policies, and there's a lot of different issues that we'll just begin to touch upon, and then, of course, throughout the rest of the course, through conversations and your readings, you'll address some of the other issues related to grading. So as you know, you always want to have a grading scale. Students want to know what their performance on a task is going to equate to in terms of a final grade. And this is, just a very, very generic example. Obviously, you need to be consistent with whatever your school offers, your college, if there's minus grades and plus grades. Sometimes there might be consistent grading processes across an institution, and sometimes you'll get to determine your own grading scale. But the idea here is you definitely want to make sure students understand how you'll be calculating that final grade. Now, the other really important issue is that your grading policies are aligned with your learning outcomes. Now, this is a very interesting concept. So, if when you're new to teaching, I'll even tell you, even myself, when I was new to teaching, I kind of just said, okay, there should be midterm, final, paper, presentation, and trying to figure out how much these different assignments should be weighted was very tricky. It was hard to know, like, how much should a final be worth? Should it be 10%, 20%, 40%, 50%? How much really should it count as? Well, there's a couple of things that you want to think about as you're deciding, how much to weight different assignments. One has to do with the learning outcomes. And if it is a task that's heavily aligned to the learning outcomes, so let's say a final exam might be aligned to almost all of your learning outcomes, that might really warrant it being more heavily weighted. However, on the other hand, if there's a paper that might be a pretty big project, but maybe is only aligned to one of the learning outcomes, then maybe it shouldn't be a super significant part of the grade, because again, the grade really should represent how well students have learned the course material and achieved the learning outcomes. Um, some of the other issues that we're going to talk about in just a moment is, what you should do if a student doesn't hand in a grade, if they hand in grades late. And the reason that I'm bringing this up on this slide is because many faculty sometimes get overly focused, I think, on timeliness. And I'm not saying it's not an important issue, because it is. We need to make sure we're responsible and are definitely engaged in, good time management, etc. But unless time management and handing things on time is one of your learning outcomes, then the grade may not accurately reflect whether or not they learned the course material. So something to think about. It's not an easy issue to resolve, and I think that you have to constantly and continually think about it. I know I do every semester I'm teaching. The other issue is I wanted to think about standards-based grading versus normative-based or grading on a curve. I think it's really important for students to understand what the bar is, and that's exactly what standard-based grading does. It says, here's the outcome I'm expecting you to achieve. Then your grade should really represent how far you traveled. Did you get all the way to the grade? Did you get halfway, three-quarters of the way, and so on and so forth. So you do want to think about rubrics, or at least identifying what the bar is, so students know what they're being measured against. And I find that really is a very effective way to do the grading approach versus grading on a curve, which, then you're kind of pitting peers against peers, and it really depends on how they're doing versus how well each individual is doing according to your learning outcomes. All right, so here's the issue of makeup exams. When I first started teaching, I will tell you, I got advice from a fellow faculty member who said, make sure you put in bold letters, no makeup exams allowed on your syllabus, because you will get students constantly coming up to you with excuses and different issues, and if you just make sure it's on your syllabus, then you won't have to worry about all the chaos of giving all these makeup exams. And I'm a little embarrassed to tell you that when I first started teaching, I just took that advice, but I quickly discovered that was not going to work for me, because even though that was on my syllabus, some students were coming up to me and still requesting to have a makeup exam because of some very real issues. Then I found myself in a position of like the excuse police. Is this excuse worthy of a makeup exam? Is this one not? And I also really grappled with this issue because I worried that some folks might be more willing to challenge you on this, where others might see it on the syllabus, caps or no caps, and say, well, that's the policy. I don't have a right to go and ask for anything in terms of an exception. So I also grappled with, these are real issues. If there was a death in the family, an illness, things that really, you would want to give a makeup exam for, and so I did. But then I was worried that I wasn't being fair to maybe someone who didn't approach me about the makeup exam. So when I think about makeup exams in general, again, most of these policy decisions are, based on experience more so than research. There's a little bit of research here and there, and I will share a study with you in a few moments, but most of it is really more based on experience. And you need to do, I think, what is consistent with your course goals. So again, if my course goal is for students to learn this theory and research and different concepts, and I'm not giving them the opportunity to make up the exam, they're missing an opportunity to not only show me what they've learned, but exams are also a great way to engage in further learning. So even if they don't perform well on the exam, that act of taking the exam, practicing that retrieval process, and then hopefully processing it afterwards is still an effective learning activity. So, at the end of the day, you have to decide what you're willing to do. I think there are several different approaches. Some faculty like to give several exams. So let's say you had 3 exams and a cumulative final. You might do the drop the lowest exam grade. That might be the way so you don't have to manage a lot of makeup exams. You might also be in a position where your college has a testing center where makeup exams are pretty easy to administer, or perhaps you can use an online option. I've also seen faculty use a verbal option so that if you miss an exam, then you meet with the faculty member in their office and you answer short answer / essay kinds of questions verbally. Some faculty feel like that, will eliminate any of the fake excuses, and someone who has a legitimate reason would certainly take you up on that offer. Again, no right or wrong answers here, except for I would really caution you against putting a policy that you're not really going to honor. So for me, when I first had the no makeup exam policy and I was giving makeup exams, that wasn't consistent with my practice. So I no longer put that in my syllabus, but I do put in my syllabus that makeups would only be given, at my discretion, of course. It's not just willy-nilly to anyone. But that, generally speaking, if you have a significant issue, I want you to come and talk to me about it so that we can come up with a plan to keep you on track in the class. I think that it's challenging to know what the right thing to do is, and I think the more faculty colleagues you talk to and the more experiences you have, the better you'll be able to make a policy that works for you. Now, what about late work? A lot of faculty really get very rigid about this. A due date is a due date, and then there's a whole other group of faculty who are much more loose about it, and better late than never is kind of their approach. I try to strike a balance myself. I think, again, it's important for you to understand what happens when a 0 is entered into a grade book. 0 really can be a killer grade. And as you're going to read in several of the research studies, there are different approaches, minimum grades and different things of that nature that might make it not off the charts horrific, like you can't, sometimes that killer grade that's it. If I get a 0 on this assignment, I can't possibly pass the class. And again, that's usually not our goal as a faculty member. So while we certainly want students to be respectful of deadlines, we also need to recognize that students are human and life happens and they might need some exceptions. Now, you're also human and you only have so many hours in a day, and you've set up a schedule that works for you so that you're not constantly grading papers every day of the week. So you need to kind of have a rhythm established as well. So you might want to think about maybe having, everybody gets one pass at a late assignment. You might want to think about not allowing late assignment submissions on very small stakes assignments. That's kind of the approach I've been taking recently. So if it's a reading assignment or a quiz that literally counts for about 1% of their grade because it's one of maybe 10 or 15 quizzes throughout the semester, then I'm usually not allowing those to get retaken. But if it's a big midterm or it's a big paper that's a killer grade, I certainly would rather have them submit it later, even if it is for reduced points. And, you certainly can take some points off. Again, I'd be cautious about being too extreme with that. I know some faculty are every day it's late, it's a grade down. Well, then you've only given them a window of a couple of days. And if their life circumstance really warranted something longer, like a death in the family, a couple of days may not be enough for them to get back on track. So again, be mindful of what you think you're willing to do and what you think is aligned to your learning outcomes. So as I mentioned before, the impact of a zero grade is very huge. It can be just a complete killer in terms of whether it's statistically possible to even get a passing grade, and students really can suffer in terms of their motivation. And the truth of the matter is when you look at the final grade, then at the end of the term, it does not really capture the achievement or lack of achievement of learning outcomes. It has to do with missing a deadline. So you want to make sure that your grades that you're giving out at the end of the term really are a message about how well those learning outcomes were achieved. So I encourage you to read the work of Guskey and others to think about that power, of really, the impact of that zero grade and how negative that impact really can be. Now, some folks like to do a drop the lowest exam grade. I mentioned that just a couple minutes ago, and there is a research study here done by McDermott who found that it really did not matter. I know some folks and faculty think and worry about grade inflation. If I drop the lowest exam grade, am I inflating grades? Well, the truth is you want your final grade to be representative of their learning. And, if there's an extreme low grade, maybe that's pulling everything else down so much that you're now not accurately measuring what they really have learned. Everyone's entitled to a bad day here or there. So I think what we want to do is get rid of maybe an outlier and give students a chance to really demonstrate what they've learned. So it seems here that this particular research showed that it didn't hurt the final and actually found that it improved the group who had to drop the lowest exam grade scenario actually had the highest performance on the cumulative final. Again, that might be a motivational factor, hey, this faculty is really treating me with a lot of respect and maybe they're putting forth more effort. I don't know. That's speculation. It's hard to know what caused that. It's really difficult to say, but I think it's important to send students a message that our grading system is going to capture your achievement and not a bad day. So the other issue is whether or not you should allow students to resubmit work. And this really becomes a time management problem for you as a faculty member because ideally I think we would all agree that we want students to use our feedback and put it into practice. So I don't think you'd find a faculty member who would say this is a terrible idea. I think you'd have a lot of faculty members saying, well, how on earth could I possibly grade all these papers again after grading them the first time? Because again, it's an incredibly time-consuming task. Well, there are a couple of different ways to go about this. Some folks do a front-end resubmission process where you can submit the draft early, and it's by choice. It's voluntary. It's not always a requirement. And that's one way to then have that feedback to put into action before it's actually graded. There are other times when faculty members are letting students resubmit their work, and a couple different ways you can do that. You certainly could do a blanket, anybody can resubmit anything at any time. And I will tell you, several faculty members who I know who do that actually say that students love that, but they don't take advantage of it as nearly as much as you would think. So the workload really isn't that, significant. But you have to be prepared just in case everybody does take you up on it. If you offer it, you do have to provide it. The other thing you could do is maybe you give everybody a one-time, resubmission opportunity. So you could set different parameters so that you're not resubmitting work over and over again every assignment, but maybe just on this one big assignment everyone can do it, or everyone can kind of pick one assignment that they just kind of missed the mark with and they want to have an opportunity to learn from it and redo it. So those are some different issues to think about. Lots of complicated issues once you enter the grading arena. But I certainly hope this gives you some food for thought, and I think the readings and the conversations that will work in this module will also really be an eye-opener for you, and probably leave you with more questions than answers, but that's good. I think it's good for us to constantly be thinking about it. I know I do, I know my colleagues do often, constantly think about what makes sense in terms of this grade. We want it to make sense, but we need to balance our time, students' time, and obviously, most importantly, the learning process. Okay, thanks so much.